people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
To the mother relay, we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Reigning light flyweight champion Kim Clavel says the biggest fight out there for me is Senicia Estrada. Will be $1 million fight for the both of us.
There's some work needs doing before it becomes about Clavel versus Estrada. This weekend, it's going to be about Clavel versus Plata.
Kim Clavel views her upcoming title unification bout as the first step towards becoming undisputed junior flyweight champion. It's hardly the endgame for the undefeated Montreal native who believes that status will lead to her ultimate jackpot fight. The biggest fight out there for me is Senicia Estrada, Clavel told BoxingScene.com. There is Yo Costavalle out there as well, but I think the big blockbuster fight for me is when Senicia and I eventually fight.
I think Yo Costavalle still holds one title in the women's light flyweight division. She was forced to vacate the other, the WBO title that she won from Evelyn Bermudez, then unified champion Evelyn Bermudez.
She moved up in weight for that fight for the then unbeaten unified champion, and she won the fight. But the WBO has a rule. They don't allow any of their champions to hold on to multiple titles at multiple weights. They force them to choose.
She had a WBO title at light flyweight and a WBO title at minimum weight. Ultimately, she chose to hang on to the WBO minimum weight title.
That being said, I don't know how much of an option she is for Kim Clavel. Kim, who says, maybe this year or next. Whenever we fight, I believe it will be $1 million fight for the both of us. For now, Clavel is fully focused on collecting her second title. The reigning WBC junior flyweight titleist will next face Mexico's own Jessica Neri Plata, who puts her WBA belt on the line in their January 13th unification clash at Place Bell in Laval, Canada. The fight was delayed by 6 weeks after Clavel came down with a high fever during fight week ahead of their eventually canceled December 1st clash last year. Clavel claimed the WBC title in brilliant fashion when she soundly outboxed long-reigning titleist Yesenia Gomez on July 29th.
In her Montreal hometown.
I was in England when Clarissa Shields and Savannah Marshall were supposed to fight in September, Clavel recalled. It was postponed because the Queen had died, but I still had the chance to meet Senicia during the fight week. We had a good conversation. I told her to keep shining, and I will keep shining as well. We need each other to deliver to the fans a big blockbuster fight.
Kim's got the right idea.
She always has. And she means to unify the light flyweight division and eventually become its undisputed champion to incentivize herself as an opponent for Senicia Estrada and help build the fight's profile. She's not playing it safe, waiting for a payday. She's stepping into the fire, and that's what I've always liked about Kim Clavel.
Viva Canada.
She's a firecracker, and she's willing to do the heavy lifting. I favor her to beat Jessica Neri Plata this weekend, and you're going to be able to see that fight here stateside by way of ESPN+.
She's willing to do the heavy lifting. She's not sat on her hands playing it safe, holding a title hostage, waiting for Senicia to move up in weight. She's willing to do what she has to do to make it a big fight.
I knew years ago the kind of fighter that Kim Clavel was when I saw she went all the way down to Mexico from Canada. Went all the way down to Mexico, south of the border, looking for smoke, looking for action, looking to keep busy. It was then I knew that Kim Clavel...
Bear in mind that she had already had a very good showing on the ESPN Plus platform earlier in the year.
She could have sat on that and took the rest of the year off based on what was going on at the time, the shutdown, the pandemic, and the scarcity of options, but she took it upon herself to go south of the border looking to get in one more fight, and she did.
It speaks volumes about her work ethic and volumes about her character, as does this upcoming weekend's fight.
And she will have her hands full this weekend opposite the ring. Jessica Neri Plata, who I'd wager is a stronger puncher than Yesenia Gomez was. Yesenia Gomez, who Kim fought last year in July.
She's got to be judicious, 1 and 2 punches at a time. She can't sit in the pocket for too long with Jessica because Jessica is a hard puncher, and she'll catch her between the shots if she can.
Like she did Jessica Tutibap, the then reigning WBA light flyweight champion.
Kim's got got to keep those hands high and play at the angles.
Jessica is a more flat-footed fighter than Kim Clavel. Kim, she can beat those feet, she can move, play at the angles, and find holes around the guard. She's also a faster puncher than Jessica, albeit not a bigger puncher than Jessica.
Though she is more athletic. She's got hand speed, she's got foot speed. She needs to use that.
Use it to her advantage. I think that Kim Clavel can win a points decision, but I also think this is going to be a tougher assignment than the Yesenia Gomez fight was.
This is a tougher assignment.
If she wins this thing, the inference we can make is that she might shoot for the newly vacated WBO title that Yokasta left behind, because I don't really think Yokasta will return to the light flyweight division.
And I don't know, maybe she fights the former champion, Evelyn Bermudez, for that belt, or someone else.
The fights that she's already had with Yesenia Gomez and Jessica Neri Plata, if she wins, would service as more than adequate preparation for an Evelyn Bermudez fight, because those fighters have got a lot in common.
They got the same sweet spot, and they've got the same base style.
Though we are getting ahead of ourselves, Kim has to beat Jessica first, and then we'll see who she ends up fighting for the WBO title, assuming she moves to pick it up.
After this weekend.
Men's lightweight news. Eddie Hearn had this to say about Gervonta Davis. The dangerous thing about Gervonta is he's not a deep thinker, not articulate. I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. He's a bad motherfucker.
He is?
He's like Mike Tyson. That makes him dangerous because he's fearless, and you can't get into his head. To which Leonard Ellerby, for some reason, replied, Eddie Hearn, you did mean that in a disrespectful way with your privileged racist ass. Who the fuck do you think you are saying he's not a deep thinker or articulate?
He's not.
He's none of those things, and it hardly has anything to do with race. What does race have to do with it?
Have you heard this guy talk?
That's the problem. Motherfuckers like you think you are more superior than others. We don't play that shit over here, you fucking clown.
Over here? Over where?
I thought you weren't in the Gervonta Davis business anymore. There's a very interesting nugget in there, and we'll get to that, but
We haven't heard a whole lot from Leonard in a while. Leonard was not among those celebrating last year's announcement that this year Gervonta would finally be facing Ryan Garcia. Leonard was uncharacteristically quiet throughout.
that uncharacteristic silence serviced as an indicator, at least to some, that Gervonta Davis may have very well in fact left Mayweather Promotions, but here he is.
Here's Lenny.
Flying false flags and weaponizing relevant issues, pertinent ones, in the American populace to his own advantage. Eddie Hearn thinking that Gervonta Davis is not an articulate speaker or a deep thinker is not a commentary on race and has very little to do with that, and everything to do with how Gervonta Davis speaks.
First of all, he's not in no position to tell somebody, say, send me the contract. Like, what you mean you'll send me the contract?
It's not exactly Dick Gregory, you know.
It's not exactly Langston Hughes or James Baldwin.
And you can't guilt trip anyone into agreeing that he is by weaponizing this taboo issue.
They just got to, like, they get a few wins and they get a little.
What Leonard is doing is playing on familiar tropes in order to elicit an emotional response by those most affected by these issues in order to form a mob that would then lambaste Eddie Hearn for his perceived misconduct.
It's not dissimilar from what you see content creators do on YouTube in order to elicit an emotional response from their audience for clicks.
Gervonta Davis is not an articulate speaker.
What are you talking about? That's what I'm saying. These guys they just got to, like,
You're just using these familiar tropes in order to make Gervonta Davis out to be some kind of a victim when he really isn't an articulate speaker.
Are we supposed to pretend that he's Paul Dunbar to spare your fragile ego?
Deep thinker. We're supposed to think he's a deep thinker getting behind the wheel without a license.
Because he's such a deep thinker, slams into a group of other motorists and injures them.
Because of how deep a thinker he is. He just wasn't thinking that night.
I don't even want to get into the varying grotesqueries of that ongoing case. A pregnant woman who alleges Gervonta Davis looked her right in the eyes as she asked for help and he fled the scene.
Bottom line is that Leonard Ellerby is willfully taking Eddie Hearn's comments out of context.
Why is he doing that? Why is he going up to bat for Gervonta Davis if he's no longer in the Gervonta Davis business? Or is he?
You talked about leaving Mayweather on the Brian Custer podcast.
I didn't say I'm leaving. I said my contract was up.
So there's still a possibility that you may resign.
Yeah.
Run that back, Turbo.
So this is your last fight with Mayweather Promotions?
Yes, sir.
Hank, you talked about leaving Mayweather on the Brian Custer podcast.
I didn't say I'm leaving. I said my contract was up.
So there's still a possibility that you may resign.
So all of a sudden, Leonard Ellerby is going up to bat for Gervonta Davis at a time when Gervonta Davis is entertaining the possibility of re-signing to Mayweather Promotions. Leonard Ellerby himself celebrating Gervonta Davis's recent gate revenue opposite the ring Hector Garcia.
I told you he wouldn't wander far. Even if he did temporarily leave Mayweather Promotions, because he's still on Showtime, he could always go back.
Still a Heyman fighter. I can care less about Gervonta Davis's ability to articulate his words. It's not a part of his job description anyway.
Although there is something to be said about how cavalier Leonard is with that accusation.
Lessening its meaning and the gravity of it overall when you misappropriate it.
Flying false flags hoping that someone will salute them.
In terms of boxing, Gervonta Davis might very well end up going back to Mayweather Promotions, assuming he ever left.
Oh, goddamn thing might have been a smokescreen.
Just like the announcement late last year that Gervonta Davis would be facing Ryan Garcia this year, only for a follow-up announcement to be made that it wouldn't even be his next fight.
You can't trust your eyes with these guys. You can't trust what you see. You can't trust what they say.
When Gervonta Davis himself said last year that he would be leaving Mayweather Promotions, that the Rolly Romero fight was supposed to be his last fight with them, and he was going to go his own way, do his own thing. Now he's entertaining the possibility of going back, assuming he ever actually left. I'm not surprised.
It's all very Vince McMahon. It's all very WWE.
These periodic lovers' spats that Gervonta Davis has with Floyd Mayweather and Leonard Ellerby, his then promotional outfit, his then promoters, the drama that always seems to take place right before a Gervonta Davis fight.
It's like clockwork.
And Gervonta Davis's fans, they eat it up. A bunch of guys and gals with the combined IQ of a baked potato.
You heard what he told you ahead of the fight. You saw what he said, and now look what he's saying.
And you don't get the sense that they might be pulling a fast one on you, trying to pull a fast one on the entire boxing community at large in order to help sell fights that no one is really asking for. Because who was asking for Gervonta Davis to fight a super featherweight?
Yeah, we wanted him to fight a guy named Garcia, but not Hector Garcia, Ryan Garcia.
I'm beginning to wonder if Gervonta Davis ever really left Mayweather Promotions. I'm beginning to wonder if that wasn't all just a grift, as I view Leonard Ellerby as a shyster, a flim-flam artist, a glorified towel.
He's basically Floyd's secretary.
His personal assistant. The way he carries on, you'd think it were Ellerby Promotions. You'd think it were his name outside the building.
Don't be surprised if in the coming days and weeks you hear that Gervonta Davis has re-signed to Mayweather Promotions.
Don't be surprised, and if he does, you know what that means. That means that certain matchups really are off the table. Not that they were ever on.
They weren't. Not really.
Then Super Bantam and Featherweight news. Stephen Fulton versus Brendan Figueroa 2 for the WBC Interim Featherweight belt will reportedly take place on February 25th in Minneapolis, where Jeremias Ponce versus Subriel Matias for the vacant IBF Super Lightweight World title also on the card.
Few passing thoughts.
It took them long enough to schedule, finally pin down the Jeremias Ponce versus Subriel Matias fight. The IBF placed so much pressure on then IBF champion Josh Taylor early last year. Who would have thought that it would take this long to finally get this fight over the line?
For as long as it's taken to get this fight over the line, you might as well have let Josh Taylor hang on to his belt, but if you did, it would have still been on the top-ranked side of things, whereas now it's over there at the PBC.
He was basically forced to relinquish the red belt in order to pursue a rematch with Jack Catterall after the controversial decision in their first fight. But, you know, that fight, like this one, has taken a long time to get over the line, and for the amount of time that it's taken to get that fight over the line, he might as well not have relinquished anything.
Like I said, if he would have still been IBF champion, that title would have still been on the top-ranked side of things. Whereas right now, it's over there at the PBC, and I believe underneath it all, that was the play.
I've already surmised the ins and outs and what's happened everywhere in between now and the time that Josh vacated that IBF title in previous videos. But in a nutshell, what I think all of this was a drug-out play to get some titles over there on the PBC side of things because their guys didn't have nothing to fight for.
This lends credence to the notion and growing suspicions that the IBF has formed a rather unethical relationship with the PBC, not dissimilar to the one we see they have with the WBA.
The way they hounded Joe Cordina immediately after he became IBF champion, the way they hounded Josh Taylor immediately after the first Jack Catterall fight, and the way they don't hound PBC fighters to satisfy their mandatories. They're not hounding Jermell Charlo or Errol Spence Jr.
Shit just looks like what it looks like.
And it just is what it is. Irrespective of who wins that fight between Subriel Matias and Jeremiah Ponce, which really isn't a bad fight, they're not going to have the same profile as Josh Taylor, as Jack Catterall, as Jose Ramirez, or Teofimo Lopez.
This long drug-out play may have resulted in the IBF title washing up on the shores of PBC Island, but it's done very little to raise the profiles of either Jeremiah Ponce or Subriel Matias.
Also set to go down on this card is the rematch between Brandon Figueroa and Stephen Fulton that no one was asking for. And in truth, if Stephen Fulton is done at super bantamweight, that's his prerogative. But if he's come under criticism as a result of moving up in weight, it's because he created an expectation, created a demand that he will not meet. He knew he's heading for super bantamweight, and everybody already knows that. And based on him being an undisputed champion at bantamweight, upon descending to super bantamweight, he would effectively be Stephen Fulton's mandatory challenger. The perfect segue to finally do the fight between them. But you see where Stephen is going. You see what he's doing.
His timing is impeccable.
We've already covered all those angles in my previous video, and what we can expect to see moving forward is a conscious effort to belittle and berate Naoya Inoue, irrespective of what he accomplishes at super bantamweight, on the premise that he never fought Stephen Fulton, who willfully left.
It's not dissimilar from what they did to Terrence Crawford when he moved up to welterweight. They disregard everything he accomplished at lightweight and super lightweight
based on the fighters that he didn't fight at welterweight, the fighters that didn't want to fight him, I should say. Fighters like Keith Thurman, fighters like Errol Spence Jr. and Danny Garcia. They're going to do that to Inoue.
But the silver lining for Inoue is that they don't have the run of the place at 122 the same way they did at 147.
The saving grace is that they may not be able to freeze him out the same way they froze Terrence Crawford at welterweight out all of these years. There's still MJ Akhmadaliev, a matchroom fighter, and we know if nothing else, he knew he can get his hands on that brown belt. He can get his hands on the WBO title.
Force Stephen Fulton to vacate it, because we know he's not moving back down.
When he doesn't, the title's up for grabs. If he knew he picks it up, he can then move on to a MJ Akhmadaliev fight. Unify at least 3 titles in this division.
That small section of boo birds will belittle and berate him, even if he does become a 4-division champion.
Though it won't matter, because Naoya Inoue is already worth a lot of fucking money in Japan, in the land of the rising sun. Whatever he does in America is just a bonus. It's just extra credit. He doesn't actually need to fight here.
Doesn't actually need Stephen Fulton.